Under the soft glow of the office lights, Kendall sat at her desk, tension knotted in her shoulders. Her mother's voice crackled with disappointment over the phone, cutting through the clamoring silence. "Kendall, you're abandoning your family," declared her mother, Marissa, with an authority that could chill the warmest night. Kendall sighed deeply, brushing her finger over the edge of her paperwork, reminders of the endless hours she invested to keep her life in balance. "Mom, this isn't about family," she replied, her voice firm yet weary. "Dalton is 30. He needs to handle his own responsibilities." Marissa's response came swiftly, laden with the familiar guilt and reproach that Kendall had grown used to over the years. "He's your brother. Family is supposed to help one another." Kendall's eyes wandered to the papers on her desk, symbolizing the long journey of self-reliance she'd undertaken since her father had passed away when she was just 10. While she had matured quickly, assuming responsibilities children her age could barely fathom, her brother Dalton, on the other hand, breezed through life carefree. At his age, he worked minimal hours at a tech store, indulging in luxuries he couldn't afford: gadgets, nightlife, and vacations. Now, with eviction looming due to unpaid rent, their mother had insisted, not asked, that Kendall cover his dues. Her refusal sent ripples through their small world. Awakening 2 days later, Kendall was greeted by the harsh glow of her phone screen, her heart sinking as she opened Linkshare. There it was, her mother's public lament. Family should stick together, but sadly, that's not always true. It's heartbreaking when money outweighs family values. "I'm deeply disappointed." The comments churned, a melting pot of sympathy for Marissa and criticism for Kendall's alleged callousness. And then there was Dalton's post. "I never thought my own sister would leave me in the cold, but at least now I know who truly cares." "Thanks, Mom." Stinging betrayal gripped Kendall as she placed her phone face down, the cityscape beyond her window a blur of lights and shadows. Years of sacrifices reduced to public scorn. But boiling beneath the surface of her quiet anger was resolve, a realization that this fight was far from over. If her family wanted a spectacle, she was ready to give them one. That evening, as the weight of the past years unfolded before her, Kendall pored over every instance she'd extended a lifeline to Dalton. Each financial crutch she'd provided, each irresponsible purchase he'd prioritized over stability. Her mother's ever-present excuse, "Boys are just different," rang hollow in memory. It wasn't just the irresponsibility, but Marissa's perpetual defense that stung the most. Her mother's vilification through social media was the final, unkind blow. Unable to shake the fire within, Kendall sat down at her kitchen table, laptop open and cursor blinking, an image of all the times she'd tried, and failed, to steer her brother in the right direction. The whirlwind of online judgment clouded her thoughts, pressing against the knot in her stomach that wouldn't let go. Resolute, she dialed a lawyer that night, detailing with shaky breath the damage those public posts had wrought on her reputation. "I can't let them get away with this," she declared, her anger momentarily mastered by quiet determination. The lawyer listened intently, laying out the framework for addressing defamation, perhaps signaling the start of the path to reclaiming her own narrative. A storm was brewing, not in the sky, but deep within Kendall's heart, as she ended the call with her lawyer. Relief mingled with a tenacious kind of anger coursed through her. Finally, someone believed in her story, in her pain. Her eyes traced over the screenshots saved on her phone, thumb flicking through each with surgical precision. Then a thought fluttered like a shadow growing darker: her father's inheritance. It was an old arrangement, one she hadn't revisited in years since she assumed her share was tucked away until she turned 25. The next morning, as the frost of the dawn lingered over her windows, Kendall rang the lawyer again. "Could you also check on my inheritance?" she asked, voice steady and deliberate. His promise to look into it felt like a load lifted, unaware that this request would unearth a betrayal far deeper than public shaming. Nearly a week slipped by before an email landed in her inbox, its subject chilling enough to freeze her mid-breath: inheritance investigation findings. Reading the contents brought a deluge of shock. Her brother Dalton had been systematically draining her inheritance account for 5 years. The fund was under her mother Marissa's control until Kendall turned 25, but Dalton had somehow wrangled access afterward. Her breath hitched as she scrolled through the report, each unauthorized withdrawal a smug reminder of Dalton's audacity. Thousands of dollars squandered her money, unknowingly bankrolling his indulgent extravagance. Electronics, concert tickets, vacations, luxuries Kendall herself had painstakingly resisted in favor of security and savings. Reaching for the phone with trembling hands, she sought further clarity from her lawyer, who detailed the apparent theft. "Your brother accessed the funds without consent," he said, his voice a steady anchor in the sea of her emotions. "It's theft, clear and blatant." Kendall reclined, the enormity of the redistribution of money rattling her spirit. How had this happened under her mother's watchful eye? She always believed Marissa to be vigilant, yet it appeared either unknowingly or misguidedly, she enabled Dalton's spree. It was a monumental breach, far beyond the Linkshare fiasco. That evening found Kendall poring over the financial statements, each transaction a personal affront. Vibrant memories of frugality, of dodging her desires, reared up against the background of Dalton's lavish expenditures. Surprisingly, the public defamation seemed like child's play next to this treachery. Despite temptation, Kendall stopped short of dialing Marissa immediately. A confrontation without a plan would only invite more of the same evasive guilt tactics. Instead, she fired off an email to her lawyer. What's the next step? Her resolve crystallized. She knew that the days of being the compliant peacekeeper were over. Tonight, it was Dalton's turn to realize just who he had been crossing. Within the Spartan confines of her lawyer's office the following day, Kendall laid out the situation in full. The revelations were laid bare: social media defamation and the misappropriation of her inheritance. "This isn't just about finances anymore," she stated, her voice a hardened shield. "My family crossed a line, and it's time to act." Nodding thoughtfully, her lawyer began sketching out a plan. Start with the defamation from the posts, a more straightforward but public battle. The inheritance theft would require a separate, indelicate approach, fraught with family ties and emotional scars. "We'll proceed with both. But be prepared. It can get messy." Kendall met his gaze, resolve like steel. "Messy doesn't scare me. I'm done being the convenient doormat." That night, as Kendall stared at her cell phone, she knew she couldn't keep waiting for answers from Marissa. Whether ignorance or misplaced trust, it was time to unearth the truth about Dalton's misappropriation. She needed to know where Marissa stood with all this, complicit or naive. In the dim quiet of her apartment, Kendall clutched her phone, anticipation prickling her skin like 1,000 tiny needles. It was time for a confrontation. "Mom," she began, steady as a rock, knowing the storm she was about to unleash. Marissa, her mother, responded with that familiar, cutting edge to her voice. "Kendall, are you ready to apologize? You know your brother, Dalton." Kendall interrupted, her patience fraying. "Let's cut to the chase. What about Dad's inheritance? Why has Dalton been raiding my portion?" The silence stretched across the line, heavy and telling. Confusion, or was it guilt? Laced Marissa's eventual reply. "What are you talking about?" Kendall pressed on, her heart pounding with betrayal and disbelief. "I had a lawyer review the account. For the past 5 years, Dalton has been siphoning money, thousands, from what was meant for me. Did you know?" Marissa hesitated, a pause that confirmed Kendall's suspicions more than any words could. "Kendall, it's not what you think," Marissa defended weakly. "Dalton, he needed it. He promised he'd repay every cent." Anger constricted Kendall's chest, her voice icy and unwavering. You knew, and you said nothing." Marissa's tone shifted, defensive and pleading. "It wasn't stealing. It's family money. He was in a tight spot. I thought he'd handle it wisely." Kendall laughed bitterly, a sound edged with years of suppressed frustration. "Wisely? While I'm here hustling endlessly, he squanders it on luxuries. And you allowed it." Her mother's protests were a distant buzz, but Kendall's resolve hardened. "No more. You'll hear from my lawyer," Kendall declared, ending the call with a mix of empowerment and sorrow. She had finally chosen herself, a decision long overdue. Unsurprisingly, the fallout from her decisive stand was swift. The next morning, her phone buzzed incessantly with missed calls and voice messages from Marissa, oscillating between defensiveness and desperation. "Kendall, don't do this. Dalton meant no harm. Let's handle this as a family, not in court." Ignoring the pleas, Kendall stood her ground. This was about establishing boundaries, not just retrieving money. It was about making sure neither Marissa nor Dalton ever exploited her goodwill again. Dalton, meanwhile, turned to the court of public opinion. A new slew of link share posts attacked Kendall, branding her selfish for prioritizing money over family. Greedy and heartless, the posts screamed, drowning in a sea of sycophantic agreement. Kendall's jaw clenched as she bore the weight of digital vitriol. Screenshots flew to her lawyer with clinical detachment. The subsequent meeting cemented their strategy. "We'll proceed with both the defamation and inheritance suits," the lawyer confirmed. "But be prepared, your relationship with your mother will suffer further damage." Kendall's resolve was unyielding, a diamond forged in the crucible of neglect. "Let's do it," she affirmed. The lawyer hesitated, cautioning her of potential courtroom revelations. "Dalton will need to explain where the money went. Are you ready for that?" A flicker of doubt crossed Kendall's mind, a curiosity about the depths of Dalton's misdeeds. But the thought of lingering in the shadows of their betrayals steeled her resolve. "I'm ready," she declared. That evening, a tentative call from Marissa came through. This time, Kendall answered. Marissa's voice trembled with an emotion that seemed suspiciously like regret. "I spoke to Dalton. He told me things about the money. I'm sorry, Kendall. I didn't realize how bad it was." Her mother's apology hung in the air, an ethereal promise dissolving in the breeze of distrust. Kendall listened, letting her words drift away like leaves caught in a restless wind, knowing that whatever came next, she would face with newfound courage. In the heart of an unexpectedly turbulent summer night, Kendall found herself staring at her phone, its bright screen a portal of unresolved betrayals. "I'll speak with him again. We can resolve this without it going to court," her mother, Marissa, implored, her voice fractured with fatigue and denial. Kendall closed her eyes as if to shield herself from unwanted truths. "Mom, there's no turning back. It's no longer within my control," she replied, sorrow mingled with finality. Endless moments ticked into days before her attorney called with another revelation that turned Kendall's world on its axis. "We've been digging through additional financial records," Everett began, his voice steady yet grave. "It's not just your inheritance. Dalton has been siphoning funds from your mom's retirement account, too." Dread slithered up Kendall's spine like a cold draft. "Retirement account? How long?" She could barely form the words, her thoughts a tumult of disbelief and worry. "The withdrawals match the pattern from your inheritance, like clockwork," Everett explained. The realization that Marissa's naive defense of Dalton had left her vulnerable stung deeply. "Does she know?" Kendall asked, fearing the answer. "Not yet," Everett replied, leaving the next steps and their consequences to Kendall. Heart pounding, Kendall picked up the phone once more that evening. "Mom, there's something you need to hear," she began, trying to soothe her voice into reassurance. Marissa listened, and when Kendall finished detailing Dalton's deceit, the silence echoed like a hollow void. "He took my money too?" Marissa finally whispered, disbelief breaking her voice like a shattered prism. "Yes, Mom," Kendall softened, sorrow mingling with empathy for the woman who had both wounded and been wounded. "You've been enabling him for too long, and now we face the consequences." As her mother began to cry, Kendall couldn't deny a flicker of sympathy, recognizing that even betrayal has its victims. "What now?" Marissa asked, as tears laced her voice with vulnerability. "We let the legal process unfold," Kendall said firmly. "It goes beyond money. It's about making Dalton accountable." Days turned into a cascade of tense anticipation. Filing both lawsuits, Everett prepared for a confrontation that promised to lay bare long-hidden family skeletons. Determined not to flinch, Kendall steeled herself for the inevitable fallout, a burden that felt as necessary as it was onerous. The courtroom arrived too soon, a somber arena where justice clashed with heartache. Anticipation and dread intertwined as the opening acts of her family's saga started to play. Justice for years of entitlement and theft lay on one side. Painful unveiling of familial rifts sat on the other. Dalton swaggered in, arrogance a cloak against reality, while Marissa looked like a ghost in the courtroom, the weight of failure heavy on her shoulders. Avoiding Kendall's eyes, she embodied the despair of a captain abandoning ship. Everett methodically laid the evidence bare. Records and screenshots formed a tapestry of Dalton's deceit. Each piece of proof chipped away at his composure, unease rippling through him like a sudden, unexpected gust. When Dalton spoke, his words dripped with dishonest contrition. "I never meant for things to spiral," he claimed, his sincerity as false as a mirage. "I was in a bind. I only took the money thinking I could repay it. But Kendall's always had her life stitched tight. She has no idea what it's like to struggle." Kendall's jaw tightened, anger surging through her like wildfire. Dalton's twisted portrayal of her as a paragon of privilege slashed deep, each word a reminder of the sacrifices she made while navigating her own choppy waters. As she listened, she felt the fracture lines of her family growing ever wider, yet her resolve held strong, an unwavering beacon on a turbulent sea. Under the harsh lights of the courtroom, Kendall listened with clenched fists as her brother, Dalton, attempted to weave a tapestry of excuses. His tales of hardship couldn't disguise the lavish outings or feudal luxuries he'd enjoyed at her expense. The evidence was a blaring contrast to his contrived victimhood. When called to the stand, their mother, Marissa, hesitated, her eyes starting towards Dalton. Her voice quivered, uncovering layers of realization. "I trusted Dalton," she admitted, voice fraying under the weight of truth. "I believed he would use the funds wisely. I didn't know the extent of his actions or how much it hurt Kendall." Her confession, laced with remorse, flickered with accountability. The judge's ruling landed squarely in Kendall's favor. Dalton was ordered to repay the inheritance he had siphoned and publicly apologize alongside Marissa for the defamatory storm they had stirred. Though victory was not wrapped in triumph, Kendall understood it would take years for Dalton to fulfill restitution. The beginning lay in the acknowledgement of wrongs. Shell-shocked yet resilient, as they exited, Dalton speared her with a disgruntled glare. "Hope you're satisfied," he sneered. "I am," Kendall replied, her gaze unwavering, the sting of betrayal melting into steely resolve. Marissa lingered, a specter of regret veiling her features. "Kendall, I don't know how to fix this." "You start with honesty," Kendall counseled, her tone a blend of firm and forgiving. "With me, with yourself, and with Dalton. Excuses can't shield anymore." Marissa nodded, her expression a tapestry of guilt and melancholy. "I'll try," she whispered, carrying the weight of decades in those two simple words. That evening, as the court's echoes faded into the quiet of her apartment, Kendall wrestled with emotions that swirled like a tempest. The courtroom battle had ended, but the path of setting boundaries loomed, a daunting task, but one she was ready to confront. The hard truths faced about Marissa and Dalton settled into her consciousness like stones, yet beneath the ache lay a burgeoning sense of liberation. She had finally held herself high. In the days sliding forth from the legal ruling, an unfamiliar calm permeated her life. The onslaught of pleas and crises seemed to evaporate, a silence that ushered in a peculiar peace rather than absence. Perhaps Marissa was cowed by embarrassment, or maybe the verdict had seeded reflection. One quiet afternoon, as Kendall sorted bills at her kitchen table, her phone buzzed with Marissa's name. Pausing, she answered, tone guarded yet open. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Kendall," Marissa began, each word measured, dripping with hesitant hope. "I've been reflecting on everything about Dalton and the court." Kendall simply listened, unsure yet hopeful of Marissa's path forward. "I didn't believe it, resisted the truth for so long." "But you were right," Marissa admitted, her voice breaking under the admission. "I let him wrong you, stood by through it all. I'm truly sorry." The words tumbling into the space between them excavated emotions Kendall had cautiously shelved. Her imagined scenarios of such an apology seemed frail next to reality. "Thank you," Kendall replied softly. "But it's not just about apologies. It has to be about change. I need to matter to you, otherwise, this pattern will just repeat." "I know," Marissa acknowledged, her sigh conveying the struggle within. "I want to do better and hope it's not too late." "It's not," Kendall allowed after a moment's thought. "But it'll take time." Meanwhile, Dalton retreated into silence, and though wary of potential strategies for vengeance, Kendall's lawyer reassured her financial retribution was legally constrained. Then one afternoon, a notification blinked on her screen. Dalton had posted on Linkshare. Warily, Kendall opened it, bracing for another wave of vitriol. Instead, she found words that startled her. "I want to apologize to everyone I've hurt, especially my sister, Kendall. I've made mistakes and aim to make amends. I know it'll be a long road to forgiveness." A whirlwind of conflicting feelings swept through Kendall. Was Dalton, at last, committing to change or crafting another tale to disguise his truth? Each word a fragile promise reflected by a history of betrayal. Under the glow of the city lights, Kendall found herself contemplating a twilight she thought she might never experience again, a moment unburdened by the shadows of her family's legacy. With the courtroom saga behind her, she had chosen silence over engagement when it came to her brother, Dalton. His public apologies had been left unanswered on her end, a door she wasn't ready to reopen just yet. In the months that followed, Kendall embarked on a journey of renewal. Immersing herself in her career, she discovered passions long sidelined by familial obligations and even began sketching out plans for a much-needed vacation. The fragile connection with her mother, Marissa, hovered in a space of tentative rebuilding. Their weekly calls no longer echoed with complaints or demands, but instead centered on how Kendall was doing, a small but meaningful shift. With Dalton, however, Kendall maintained her distance, knowing the restitution from the court's ruling would trickle in slowly, and that was acceptable. Financial restitution was not as important as reclaiming her autonomy, her spirit. The most striking transformation was that, for the first time in ages, the oppressive weight of anticipated obligations dissipated. Kendall was learning to exist for herself, experiencing a tranquility she hadn't thought possible. Perched on her balcony one evening, tea in hand, she watched as the city twinkled beneath her. No longer occupied with the persistent demands of her kin, the new chapter felt surreal. The legacy of constant tension had slipped away, replaced by serenity, a welcome guest. Standing up for herself hadn't dissolved her connections. Instead, it carved out a sanctuary of inner peace she'd long yearned for. Kendall's relationship with Marissa continued to mend, though slowly. Conversations about her mother's garden or latest reads replaced the weightier, more burdensome exchanges of the past. Kendall entertained glimpses of the mother she'd always hoped for, one who valued her daughter for her presence rather than her sacrifices. Dalton's presence lingered like a ghost of the person she used to know. Court-ordered payments signaled attempts at restitution, yet Kendall learned not to hang her hopes on these gestures or his empty apologies. The growth she sought was from within, arising out of respect for her own journey rather than bitterness or retribution. This insight allowed her to embrace independence with a clarity previously obscured by her entangled quest for their approval. Reflecting on the unfolding events, Kendall understood the transformation was less about them and more about herself. She had escaped the cycle of pleasing those who readily took her support for granted, bending herself to standards that never reflected her own dreams. In the past, she sacrificed joy for duty, a pattern now broken by the assertion of self-worth. Marissa's gentle overtures marked a shift, a slow climb towards reconciliation and understanding, though trust had a distance to travel. Kendall held onto the possibility that their bond could evolve into something more nurturing. Meanwhile, Dalton's seeming atonements passed unheeded, resonating with hollowness. Forgiveness, if it ever came, was a horizon far yet. What remained critical were the boundaries Kendall erected, the newfound reverence for her own time and contributions. Despite the doubts that occasionally whispered discouragement, the decision to honor her worth vindicated itself anew each day. The tea warmed her hands, just as the pride of her progress warmed her spirit. The peace surrounding Kendall had been arduously earned, a fortress of resilience against a backdrop that demanded so much for so long. As the city shone brightly beneath her watchful gaze, she knew this newfound strength was a gift she would never relinquish.